So as introduced, I'm Sanjay Yadave. I'm based here in Singapore, head up the enterprise segment, and the thing that I'm most passionate about are the big migration projects that we're working on with customers. And what we're hoping to share today and in this track is how we're helping customers along that journey. And I'm going to share with you today some of the best practices and patterns of success that we've seen in enterprise customers adopting cloud and making that journey to AWS. So I guess just to kind of kick things off, here's a beautiful scene right here. I don't know by show of hands if anybody knows what we're looking at here. This is actually the great migration that takes place in East Africa every year. And I think for some customers, they feel like their journey to cloud can be of a similar nature. This is actually the largest overland migration that takes place in the world. It's one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. And there's about 1.5 million wildebeest every year make this journey, along with 200,000 zebras. And it's a long journey that begins actually next month. A month that follows several months where many, many calves are born. So like a lot of customers, there'll be wildebeest making this journey for the first time. And that can be quite a daunting exercise. I think when we talk to customers, they may have this perspective. Some are hesitating, some are taking that leap. And as we've heard today, as I'm sure you're aware, many, many customers are using AWS today and have been on migration journeys for a number of years. But still, we're working with customers who are about to take that leap. Now, if you look at the scene here, it's kind of interesting because obviously safety comes up. Is there a crocodile in the front here? Maybe you have security and compliance up there on the rock. I don't know. But customers today are asking us, what's the right way to do this? The great thing is with AWS, as Andy Jassy, our CEO, says, there's no compression algorithm for experience. And what that really talks to is the experience that we've picked up and we've learned over the last 13 years. And that experience is not just in operating our platform and helping customers, both from a digital native and cloud native perspective, but also helping enterprise customers migrate at scale and at pace. And I guess just to talk to some of that experience, let's give you a couple of customer examples. So Capital One, they've been on a journey with AWS for a number of years. So some of these are well-known examples, but the reason it's important to call them out is companies have been doing this already for a number of years and doing it successfully. Capital One reduced their number of data centers from 8 to 3 between 2014 and 18. And actually, the way they approached their cloud migration journey was from a couple of perspectives. The first thing was they wanted to take a long-term view. The second thing they wanted to drive was innovation. And actually their biggest driver for adopting cloud was agility. Often cost is a starting point, and we'll come to that a little bit later. Part of their drive to have a long-term focus is one of the things that drove them to work with AWS. The other thing I would say is that before they began migrating any workloads whatsoever, the first thing they did was to put in place a risk framework and a risk profile. Security was absolutely of the utmost importance for them, being a very large financial services institution serving tens of millions of customers. And at Amazon, security is our day zero job. It is the thing that we focus on most crucially and ensure the utmost security around our customers' data, both in terms of the security of the platform and also the third-party services that we can make available through Marketplace. So they put in place a security framework, and the objective of the framework was to enable innovation and not choke creativity. And so they came up with the Capital One Security Custodian, Cloud Custodian framework, which basically uses machine learning to automatically inject security parameters into anybody within Capital One using the platform. So they put that very rigorous security framework in place to begin with, which then allowed them to be able to allow the organization more broadly to be able to use the platform. Now, their migration journey is not completed. They've still got another 3 years, and over the next 3 years, they're going to continue to migrate core applications, providing digital banking services to tens of millions of customers. Again, as I said, one of the drivers was, agility. The other piece I would say that they called out as critical to their success was the executive buy-in, and secondly was the strong goals that were set by the executive team. And part of facilitating that was training. They very heavily indexed on training and education in order to bring all of their teams, their developers, their IT organizations up to speed. And that's really very key, and we're going to focus more on that as we move along. Secondly, I'll touch on GE. We've been helping GE for a number of years. They've also been on an exercise of reducing the number of data centers that they have, and they're on a goal to reduce from 34 down to 4. Part of GE's goal was to reduce TCO, and actually through the work we've been doing with them, they've been able to reduce their TCO by 52%, and already have now migrated 9,000 workloads to AWS. And this is a project that's been going on for a number of years, again, just showing the length of time that we've been helping these very large-scale enterprises to migrate to cloud. And actually, if you look at most of the major industry verticals that we see today, it's happening across the industry. So in financial services, I mentioned Capital One, we have Intuit, we have HSBC, we have Barclays. If you go to healthcare, it's Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Novartis, and Bristol Myers Squibb. And there are many, many more examples closer to Southeast Asia and to ASEAN. I might touch briefly on a minute for Globe, who spoke recently at reInvent in Las Vegas in November, and they've been on a journey with us for a number of years. Some of the pain points that they were trying to address, again, were around agility. They managed to reduce their provisioning time down to less than 2 days from 90 days. Their resilience and availability of their systems went up to 4 nines, 99.99, across more than 2,000 servers over a period since 2016. The security of their environment has now been increased. And much like Capital One, the acknowledgement is that actually, and Rob Alexander of Capital One called this out, who's the CIO, they put in place a security framework that they believe enabled them to operate more securely in the cloud than they could do in their own data centers. So again, Globe was really focusing on that very heavily. And then productivity, there's been a 15x improvement in application performance since migrating to the cloud. And you can see on the left some of the key data points around the migrations that are underway. We heard it this morning in Peter DeSantis' talk about database migrations and database freedom, and there's a continued program at Globe to continue migrating off Oracle database. More recently, they've moved tier 1 workloads, such as SAS real-time analytics, and so this work is continuing, and they have now migrated 55% of their infrastructure to run on the AWS region here in Singapore. I think the other thing that I would call out is as our customers to continue to scale up their use of the platform, we're constantly working with them to reduce their spend on the platform. And for those that are staying throughout the track for the rest of the day, we'll dive deeper into some of the transformational efforts you'd require from a people and culture perspective. We're going to dive into specific applications, and at the end of the day, there's a business value section that talks to TCO and how we can help doing cloud financial management and reduce the cost of your AWS services. All-in customers. Customers are now not just migrating parts of their environment. There's many cases, many more than I can put on the slide here today. Some closer to Singapore. Singapore Life, an entirely digital insurance company providing and running their front-end platform and also their back-office operations entirely on AWS. Korean Air just announced at the end of last year that they're going all in with AWS after a 20-year outsourcing agreement with another provider. Korean Air are moving their website, their loyalty programs, their operations, flight booking systems. They're going to be building a data warehouse and running analytics on AWS using Amazon Redshift and Amazon Athena. They're going through database migrations, and their goal, once they've migrated their existing environment, is move towards much more of a microservices architecture, and we heard that talked about this morning. This notion of migration is really the beginning of a journey. Much like those wildebeest, you take those first steps, but actually it's an evolutionary process. Coming up afterwards, we have Trend Micro, who are going to be talking about how you provide security in a containerized environment, and then of course you have the evolution, once you're on the platform, to move to a serverless architecture. And that's one of the goals of Korean Air. Now I'll pause there for a minute. And I don't know how many of you feel this way. We have customers, though, that understand the benefits, that really want to get moving, but they're feeling like they're stuck. And some of the common themes that we're hearing from customers today are, they have 6+ months in terms of their release cycle. They're often dealing with performance issues and outages, which is impacting on customer experience. They are trying to move a lot of the heavy lifting work they do, the undifferentiated work, to tasks that create value for the organization. And many IT organizations we speak to are struggling in that most of their resources are spent on undifferentiated tasks and keeping the lights on. And they generally consider their environments as being high cost, low productivity, and they're struggling with agility in terms of responding to customer needs and also the business demands. So where are people kind of heading towards? There's definitely, obviously, people wanting to move much more towards cloud, but there's much more of a you build it, you own it culture. And as people move more towards microservices and DevOps and DevSecOps, they're wanting their IT teams and the developers to be responsible for the life cycle of the application. As we heard about earlier, as you move more towards microservices, it allows you to adapt and adjust different parts of the application environment without having an impact on the wider environment. So companies are wanting to think big, start small, and they want to go fast. And so here's some of the things that we've been seeing in the market. Now, we understand that migrations can be challenging. Typically enterprise IT environments are very complex. They've obviously been built up over long periods of time. We're working with banks and financial institutions in the regions who may have core banking platforms that they've developed in-house that are 30 years old. So there are some challenges in how you deconstruct that existing environment and how you then really map out those kind of operational and organizational processes. And as we spoke about earlier, how do you put the right risk frameworks in place and the right policies and governance in place so that as you move, you can then be as assured about the environment that you're moving to. So some of the best practices we've seen, I touched on it earlier about leadership and the key aspect of having executive buy-in and direction. Because often when you go through migrations, it's required to have executive buy-in and a committee that's cross-functional to be able to support the work that's going on. Got to have clear business goals, and the business really needs to understand how cloud can enable them to achieve those goals much more quickly and compete in this market. Enterprises today are seeing a lot more disruption, and this is seeing disruption from a number of areas. Obviously, many more startups, companies who are born in the cloud are challenging them in their traditional markets, and then other enterprises who may have been second or third place in their market are seeing cloud as an opportunity for them to accelerate their position and move more quickly. And as I touched on it earlier, and I'll come back to it again shortly, is the need to develop cloud skills and really understand from an organizational perspective how you can help your teams to be able to best take the use of cloud. Now, where we've seen some of these things not be in place, the challenge we've seen is companies often start projects and then they want to move from a project to a program, there's a stall. And so we've learned from this, and we want to share with you some of those aspects. So migrating to cloud offers some well-known benefits. I touched on it earlier about focusing on differentiation. What's the value to a bank or to a telco or to a manufacturing or pharmaceutical company in managing a ton of servers? So how do you help your people focus on the aspects of the business that create most value for your customers and to help your business be more effective? And one of those things is how do you create an environment where you can provide guardrails to allow people to be innovative and creative and also lower the cost of experimentation? And one of the benefits of cloud is that it enables you to try things out as experiments, and actually you haven't had to make a huge capital investment or huge investment of resources or spend long periods of time to put infrastructure in place to try those experiments. And I've touched on it a few times already, which is provide an enhanced security posture. And it's more commonly being accepted now that the capability of a cloud environment and the way that AWS provides that security can help you enhance your security posture, whether that's from the physical facilities, from the logical network separation, in terms of all of the encryption that we can provide on your data when it's in transit at rest, and all of the other services that I mentioned to you that we can provide via the marketplace and partners like Trend Micro. So there's really two themes of cloud adoption that we're seeing in enterprises, and we've talked a lot about cloud native in the session today, and also this notion of migration and transformation. And IT modernization really kind of comes in two aspects. There's another track talking about application modernization, and we can talk here today about how you facilitate that by modernizing your IT infrastructure environment and modernizing that. And as you do so, you retire technical debt and allows you to become more agile in the way that you use technology and lower your ultimate costs. On the right-hand side here, cloud native, companies who are developing new application, enterprises are seeing that the cloud is the best way to develop new businesses, new digital businesses and new applications for clients that are cloud native. Now, when we look at that, the trend we see is this. Obviously, over a period of time, the more cloud native services you're using delivers value back to the business. This notion of retiring technical debt and migration, it's a more challenging path, and actually ultimately leads you to the same endpoint. Now, we believe that these two tracks need to coexist, because if you are purely developing cloud-native front-end applications, but all of your core systems and your data are all sitting on your on-premise legacy environment, then you do encounter challenges about how you extract the most value from the platform. also, we see customers looking for opportunities to reduce their IT and TCO budget and use that as a way to reinvest into re-architecting applications or developing new cloud-native applications. And these 4 stages that we talk to are really what we would call project, foundation migration, and reinvention. Reinvention being the place where you've been able to reimagine your business and create what we're now talking about as a digital native enterprise. Because ultimately, when we look forward, the digital native businesses, the cloud native businesses that exist today, are not really startups anymore. And at some point in time, you probably consider them to be an enterprise. Much like the enterprises today who are reinventing themselves as digital native companies. And so that line will slightly blur. And that's kind of one of the goals that I think would be awesome, was over the next few years to help those enterprises, become digitally native. And that's really the notion of the track today. So I'm going to focus on some of these pieces here. So types of project, where do we see people starting? Often people talk about lift and shift of existing migrations. Companies think, well, how do I use cloud to be able to build new applications and start new businesses in the cloud? And then the third area, analytics and getting more business insights. Huge amounts of your data is sat on premise today. And as Peter DeSantis referred to earlier, in order to be able to extract most value from that data, you need to get it into the cloud to be able to take use of some of the high-level services and advanced analytics that are available to you. So common migration drivers, we've touched on some of these. Agility and developer productivity actually always come out as the top thing that most of our customers are telling us about. Data center consolidation. Many companies have invested in data centers over the years, either through partnering or through acquisition and building. And many of those companies now are seeing those data centers probably running at less than 50% utilization. And it doesn't allow them to flex around their business very effectively. This notion of digital transformation and providing, digital banking services in markets like Indonesia and in the Philippines for underbanked, and creating new web applications for your customers to interact with you. And there's a whole host of others. Obviously, cost reduction is on there. In terms of large-scale compute-intensive workloads, HPC, we're seeing some of the banks in the region. For example, DBS recently put out a case study on using AWS for bursting for their Murex workloads. We're seeing this with other banks across Asia Pacific as well. Acquisitions or divestitures. Hess, the oil and gas company that's out doing exploration, they were able to separate and divest a business unit and actually separate infrastructure or integrate infrastructure where it was required from an IT perspective in a matter of weeks instead of months. So what are we hearing customers ask? How do they migrate workloads at a quick enough pace? How do they do so that doesn't impact on business issues? And what does it mean for cloud operations? When you move to the cloud, what does it mean from an operations standpoint? So we've put in place a program, which we refer to as the MAP Migration Acceleration Program, which I'll start to talk you through now. It involves a tried and tested methodology. We do believe there to be a prescriptive way to be able to adopt cloud. Now, no 2 customer migrations are the same, so there's flexibility in the way that we can use that. There's a number of AWS and partner tools that we can make use of. We acquired TSO Logic, we work with Risk Networks. There's a number of other partner tools that we can use to facilitate the discovery to be able to plan and map out the migration. Again, I'll dive deeper into that in a minute. Partners, all of this is enabled and facilitated by our partners, and most of the enterprises we're working with today have got multiple partners in their accounts who are managing applications or infrastructure, and most of those are part of our APN, AWS Partner Network, and we can work with those. But as you'll see in the expo area out here, we have many born in the cloud partners such as CloudCover, PowerUp, BlazeClan, Sourced. There's a wide range of those partners who are dedicated to cloud migration. Some are specialists in some workload areas, for example, Lemongrass for SAP. We also work with the big GSIs, of course, the likes of Accenture, Deloitte, TCS, just to name a few. And then also you'll have seen Singtel today, being a key partner in terms of how we go to market. We have within our organization a professional services organization that can undertake a number of advisory services, but also help plan and strategize around your migration. We have an AWS certification and training practice. And then there's also an element of AWS investment that comes from the program, because we do understand that in order to get the TCO benefits you get through time and migrating to cloud, actually initially we recognize what we refer to as a migration bubble, where in that initial phase you may have dual running costs, or there's the actual cost to migrate your applications, your environment to AWS. And so we have a program that can help sort of smooth that out and take some of that away. So the enterprise migration journey we really see kind of coming in 3 stages. What we would refer to as prepare, plan, and migrate. Now, in that prepare stage, it's really about creating the case for change. And we'll dive into the kind of people, process, and technology element. But one of the biggest challenges in terms of building the case for change is how do you demonstrate value back to the business? And that's what the session later today seeks to adjust: is what's the business value of cloud, and how do you build a case for change? Because as you go through that change and as you migrate, you want to be able to demonstrate back to the business that you set out from point A to get to point B, and you're realizing the benefits that you actually set out to achieve. And that really requires to get executive support. It's absolutely critical you get that executive support. The plan stage is building the foundations and all of the key components, which is detailed planning. It may require some training and a number of other pieces I'll come to in just a moment. And then there's the migration phase. And I'll talk to how we think about putting those waves of migrations in place to help you be most successful. So as we talk to these different stages, as I said, there's probably 6 streams of work that needs to be undertaken as a part of these. And they run all the way across. And as I said, no 2 customer situations are the same. And so we see different customers approaching these different streams at different stages, depending on their business needs, depending on the industry they're in. Are they managing regulated workloads? I mentioned security. A lot of the FSI organizations we're working with are tackling that first. And in any cloud migration, you have to have the CISO involved in order to be able to make progress. Program governance, people skills, demonstrating the business value I talked about, and then really undertaking this kind of application planning and migration stage. So we're going to go a little bit deeper. Now, if we look at how we see this playing out, it begins with a migration readiness assessment. And this can be done in a couple of weeks. And it's pretty straightforward, and it's free. It's something we can undertake working with you. It's something our partners can do. And really what that does, I'll come to it on another slide, is go deeper into mapping out not just the technology component, but what are the 6 key pillars from a business and technology perspective that you need to have in place. And it doesn't just look at that application technology environment. That rapid discovery, there's a number of tools available to us, so we can work with your existing environment and your logs. It helps us build a directional business case, which basically says, okay, if we were to undertake a migration, what does that look like? Which would the applications we would prioritize are moving, why we would move them, what we would need to have in place to be able to do that. Beyond that initial stage, we then go into much more detailed MRP, migration readiness and planning stage, where we go through all of the components you see there in the minute, and that can be done in as quick as 2 months. And so these can be done really at a very quick speed, and we have an accelerated program I'll come to just at the end. The objective here is you get to the right-hand stage, and this virtuous circle of learning is really something that we practice very heavily within Amazon. Within AWS, we had this philosophy of fail fast, and we know that when you start to undertake migrations, you will learn by doing. Just maybe not like the wildebeest at the start, they have to learn by doing. The first time you make that migration, they have to learn on the go. What we hope to achieve here is to select applications that you can migrate initially that prove to the business it's possible, move a meaningful amount of applications that demonstrate some value. And of course, you'll come across a few bumps along the way, whether it was sign-offs or compliance, perhaps it's the procurement team. Using cloud is a change for your organization, and we understand that. And the objective here is to take that learning and, as you'll see, create subsequent waves from that learning. And there's a continuous process of learning here. So as you prepare for mass migration, I've labored the point, I think, around executive sponsorship. It's really critical. We've seen this in a number of accounts where projects begin and they get stalled and they get stuck. We see customers who have an organization committee or one executive leader who's going to drive the project through. They often really help unblock a lot of those challenges as we come across them. Building foundational experience across people, process, and technology. I'll go deeper on those in a minute, but that's absolutely key. And then ultimately leading to building this business case out, which helps you define what the outcome and what the measures are of success. So I talked about our MRA process. It can be conducted in a one-day workshop. It involves a questionnaire, and we meet with all of your key application owners and various stakeholders within the business. It provides a pretty comprehensive report that will give you clear gaps in areas where we feel you need to close those. It provides a kind of spider radar, so to speak, across the 6 metrics you see across the right-hand side. And what we see a lot of CIOs and CTOs doing is taking that and working with their teams going, okay, so we're really strong in in these areas, but actually there are some gaps around governance, or perhaps we need to put some training in place, or from an operations standpoint, once an app has been migrated or a workload has been migrated, how do we operate and manage that once it's in the cloud? And that's really the starting point. As I mentioned earlier, it's free, it's something we can do, and we happily work with you on doing that. That leads very quickly into a directional business case. So this is not super detailed, but it will be detailed enough, and it's based on the data from your environment. So I have a cloud economics and business value team that can work with you and understand, your actual costs. What are your operational environments? What's your environment costs, people costs, server costs, network, labor? All of those components go into the build, and we can show you, how much TCO reduction you can expect over a period of 3 or 5 years. And as I mentioned earlier, cost is obviously important, it's crucial, but this is really what then starts to fuel and create funds for further innovation and investment in re-architecting applications that are more complex to move. So getting deeper into the people, process, and technology stage. Actually, the technology piece, generally people are more comfortable with, but we have what we'd refer to as a landing zone. We'd work with you on building that. A landing zone, much like an airport, is the location the planes come in at, so think about it as the landing point for your applications and workloads when they come into the AWS environment. Obviously, the security component and the operational tools that we make available to you. Then in terms of the operations model, how do you provision? How do you manage billing? How do you forecast? We have teams that can work on that with you, and also look at the security operations you would have. And then really this piece around people. Now, the skills training is one thing, but what we see organizations who are successful in migrating doing is that they create a cloud center of excellence, which is a centralized governance team who can actually just check and work with the wider stakeholders in the business to ensure that as you migrate workloads to the cloud, it's being done in conjunction with the guardrails and policies that you want to have in place. Then, of course, the communications plan. We see customers that are most successful creating a cross-functional team that goes across HR, the front-end business, technology, operations, security, for example. And that's really quite key to ensure that everyone is clear on what's being done, why it's being done, and what the outcomes of it are going to be. Now, in terms of that kind of landing zone and the foundational things that are put in place, VMware, Kit mentioned it earlier in terms of getting the connectivity in place between your on-prem environment and AWS. Peter DeSantis referred to our global infrastructure earlier and the regions that we have, but also the network connectivity that exists between those regions. So one of the key components is creating that connectivity, which you can do via VPN, or you can do via an AWS Direct Connect. The key thing about our global backbone is we have full management of that. It means we're not reliant on internet public peering points. We can manage the traffic. We provision the bandwidth accordingly to be able to manage all of that inter-region traffic. And it's also more secure because it's running over entirely AWS infrastructure. New services that we've brought to market, Route 53 Resolver and Client VPN, providing full DNS capabilities, bi-directional DNS capabilities between your on-prem environment and your VPC, your virtual private cloud within AWS, and then also VPN services, not just for site-to-site, but also for client VPN for people who are needing to get access to your environment to be able to make changes and edit. So focusing more on the people component, as I mentioned, organizations certainly in the early stages create a cloud center of excellence or a tiger team, and over time you see the functions within that team evolving. I'd probably refer to the National Australia Bank, who are very famously on a massive education program. They call it the NAB Cloud Guild, and they're on a program to train 3,000 of their teams. And one of the things that has helped them adopt cloud more quickly is this program. What they found over a period of time is that where they had a centralized team, as they've moved through their migration journey from what they refer to as crawl, walk, and run, as they move through to walk and run, they've had to decentralize some of that autonomy and governance within their cloud environment. And like Capital One, they've been able to do that by using some of our function as a service, our Lambda services, to be able to inject security protocols and services into the AWS environment based on the users that are in the platform. And so we see this cloud organization evolving, and in a session by John Austin coming up in a little while talking about the transition for enterprises to cloud, he'll go deeper on this people component. So when we get into our planning process, we start to then work backwards. So we've done some work with you, we've done some discovery, we've maybe done some of the training that's in place, we've maybe got a cost model, and we start to think about migration patterns. We work with you on, okay, so you maybe have disconnected data, or there may be areas where there's incomplete data. I mentioned earlier we've got a number of different partners that we work with to be able to do some of this discovery, and that discovery really builds the foundation for us to work with you collaboratively on how you design that kind of migration strategy. Now, in terms of application migration patterns, there's a number of strategies that different customers take. And so if I just let this slide build for a minute, we try to categorize via the 6R kind of methodology. So rehost, replatform, repurchase, refactor, re-architect, retire, and retain. And so what we start to do is look at your application environment and understand what's the best strategy to migrate those applications. Now, we understand some of those are more challenging. Some things, for example, like old mainframes and AS400s can't just easily be migrated. Other applications maybe need to be retired because actually nobody's using them. You can sunset them. So we do take this approach, and in some cases, customers use a cloud migration as an opportunity to repurchase, so move an existing application or workload to a SaaS-based service. And obviously, we're working with many ISVs in terms of moving their applications to become SaaS-based, and they're running those on AWS. So we take this approach, and what we try to then determine is the spectrum of difficulty. How easy is it to move these applications? And what we typically see in most enterprises, and CK, who was presenting earlier from Certis, talked about their goal to get 60% of their applications to cloud this year. One of the things that we do is we look to determine which are the easy candidates to lift and shift. And lift and shift provides a meaningful, demonstrable program to the business. It allows for TCO reductions, and we typically see 40 to 50% of enterprise applications being in that rehost or replatform category, and they're fairly easy candidates to migrate and move. We have, and there were a few talked about earlier today, various application migration and automation tools that we can use. We talked about database freedom, the 14 different database services that AWS provide today, and customers wanting to use away from legacy databases. So we have the Amazon Database Migration Service, we have the Server Migration Service, and we have the AWS Migration Hub that I'll come to you in a moment. From a data transfer perspective, there's many different ways to be able to get your data into the platform. And we have, as was talked about earlier, things like Snowball, Direct Connect, and S3 transfer acceleration. The AWS Migration Hub, this is something that we can provide to customers. It becomes a single location, single pane of glass, if you like, to be able to allow customers to be able to monitor the progress of their migration. And it's leveraging a number of these third-party applications and partners that we work with. But it gives you a progress report on how that application is going, and it allows you to accelerate your migration execution by really being able to plan more effectively in how you undertake that work. Now, we talked a lot about acceleration, and actually talking about Certis, who was on stage earlier, CK, interestingly, I spent some time with him here last year at the summit in Singapore, and we ran a cloud journey simulation workshop, which he was a part of. He was a part of my team. It was really interesting. And you'll see here a number of accelerators that we have across different areas. Some around executive alignment, some around business case, and some around what we call experience-based accelerators. And we find customers are taking up our ProServe professional services, advisory services, finding those as good ways to help communicate more broadly across a cross-functional group within the business. The other piece around experience-based accelerators, I mentioned earlier National Australia Bank and how they're going through this huge guild program of training. And when we undertake an initial launch wave, the initial applications you're going to migrate, what we typically do is work with customers on creating some excitement within the team and within the organization. And so often we have things like the migration party or platform party, where on the days that applications are being migrated, we've seen customers provide t-shirts and pizzas. They'll ring bells when workloads and applications get migrated. And it's amazing to see how infectious that becomes. And these are just some of the things that we've found that we can work with customers on. And actually what tends to happen is that the rest of the people in that office or in that building get really intrigued about what's going on in the corner over there, what's going on, how are we moving to cloud, how's that helping us? And it really drives the energy within the business that helps to drive some of that positive change. So we have a very interesting program that we developed with GE. It was originally done with GE, I referred to them earlier. It's also something we've used with Honeywell, and we're also using it with a number of customers across the region. It's what we'd call a 50 and 50 program, and the story behind this one is that the CIO of one of the GE businesses was really invested in, a number of years ago, invested into moving to cloud. And so they became a little bit frustrated with some of the challenges they were having and some of the kind of the internal blockers and the objections that were being put up within their own team, within the IT and the ops organization. And they set a very ambitious goal, which was, we want to essentially move 50 apps in 30 days. Now, nobody actually thought when that was said that that could be achieved, and actually in the GE example, they actually managed to do about 40 apps in those 30 days. We then took that and we've tried to programatize it a little bit, which we do through our ProServe professional services organization. And it's a pretty intensive program, and it's not fit for every customer, but we're using it and customers are showing a lot more interest in it in the region. So if this is something that you think might kickstart your migration, then please do reach out to us. The 50 and 50 program, we do a bunch of pre-work with you in terms of setting up the environment and getting everything ready. And by moving 50 apps in 50 days, it's back to that point about demonstrating proof points to the business and that learning that you get by doing. So I guess in closing, we started talking about maybe the scary journey that a migration feels like. And most customers feel like this at the end of it. Actually, by doing it, by undertaking it, you learn a lot along the way, and actually by the end of it, and most people know when they get to the end of that point, sure they might have migrated, but actually that's not the end of the journey. We talked about it earlier, which is getting your data onto the platform, getting your workloads and your applications there, gives you then access to the high level services such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and doing some advanced analytics. And then actually even when you get to the platform, and you may be running on VMs on our EC2 service, you then have the option to move to our containers or serverless architectures and move much more to a microservices environment. So the migration just to physically get to cloud is only the beginning of a much longer journey. So I guess just some closing remarks from me. You know, Jeff Bezos says we've only really had 3 ideas that we've stuck with over the last 18 years. I guess it's more than 18 years, but certainly within AWS, we've been running for 13 years now. And you know, we put the customer first. You know, we're unusually customer focused and really driving towards helping our customers in every way, shape and form. We invent on behalf of our customers. We invent in terms of the number of customers on the platform. You know, we have millions of active customers on the platform today. You heard that earlier. Why is that important? Because all of the feedback we get from our customers in terms of service amendments, new service requirements, they all get fed back in and we develop and bring new services out. And from 2006, we had 23 services launched on the platform, and by the end of last year, it was over 1,700 new service releases just in last year alone. And there's this notion of be patient. And what I'd encourage you to do is be patient on the strategy, but impatient on the tactics. It's really important that if you set the strategic direction to reinvent your business and to be able to transform and become more digital in nature, be patient on that, don't give up, but be impatient on the tactics you use. And what I would say is get started. The customers that we see that are making most strides, that are actually getting most benefit and going much faster are the ones that get started. Don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. I'd ask you to reach out to myself and my team. We're here to help you. We're really keen to have the conversation with you. My email's on screen there. Feel free to reach out to me, and do stay in the track because we've got some super interesting talks coming up. I'm going to hand over in a few moments to one of our key partners. Trend Micro are going to talk about security in a containerized environment. And then we're going to have sessions on specific enterprise applications, which you can migrate, for example, SAP, Windows. We'll touch on database, and then also a business value section later, talking about how you demonstrate and build the business case and demonstrate the value back to the business. I'm Sanjay, Yadave. Thank you very much for your time today and really appreciate your attention. Thank you.